Welcome into the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show. I'm Alfredo Brown, joined as always by Dave Kluge. Today we got a special guest. We've got JJ Zachariason joining us to talk about some breakouts that you need to be targeting in Dynasty. And honestly, you could just look ahead to fantasy as well. JJ, thanks for joining us, man. I know one of the big things you talk about is your various models that you have, one of them being your year two model. So I want to start this off by just kind of defining what a breakout is and like asking you, what is it that you're looking for when you're even trying to identify a breakout player?
Yeah, like I have first off, thank you for calling me special. I appreciate that. It makes me feel good. So I have the ZAP model, which is the prospect model, and then I have my year two model. Those are the two like models, if you will, that I'm working with to kind of help project the first 3 years of a player's career. That's what the ZAP model looks at whenever it's projecting these prospects as they're entering the league. And then the year two model, I really created that because I was just curious about what to do with players who were either like really good. They overperformed based on expectation in year one. Like maybe they were day 3 picks and then they performed really, really well. And then you sit there after year one and you're like, how much of this was a fluke? Like how much of this matters or not? And then the opposite happening too. You get like Quentin Johnston, who does nothing as a rookie and has really bad peripherals. Like, what does that mean for his, year 2 and year 3 in the NFL? Because, this is more from a dynasty perspective, but it's something that, we usually have that like 3-year window when we're looking at our dynasty assets. So that's why I subjectively and just sort of, just use that 3-year period. But what that year 2 model does is that it takes an input, the ZAP model input, so the score of that player. So it kind of grounds that player to some degree. And then it looks at some year 1 inputs that are predictive for year 2 and year 3. So for instance, like if I only have one at running back and wide receiver, and if you look at the differences between running back and wide receiver, the running back year 2 model is much more grounded in the prospect profile than the wide receiver one is, which means, in other words, wide receiver production in year 1 is a lot more predictive than sort of how we viewed that player entering the league, which kind of makes sense intuitively. Like how often have we seen, random day 3 running backs have like decent to great rookie seasons and then they just fall off, like James Robinson or Dameon Pierce in recent years, right? Like it happens pretty frequently. Very rarely do you get like a Bucky Irving who we feel pretty good about like long term because his numbers were just so freaking out of control. Even Tyrone Tracy, this past year where we were like, I don't know what to do with him exactly. So that's what the year 2 model is able to do, is it's able to look at what that dude looked like as a prospect, input what he did as a first year player, and then try to project his best season in year 2 and year 3 by using all of those inputs.
Yeah, it feels like this time of year, these second year and third year players kind of become the misfit toys, like the old models that we forgot about. Everyone gets super hyped up about these rookies. Dave, I know this was something like we really wanted to do, just to not only move on from rookie stuff, but to actually start talking about some players that I think are pretty undervalued, right? Like everyone's just sort of looking at them in a really bad light.
Yeah, this was a weird rookie season too, where like it wasn't the most exciting class, so the fatigue set in really early. Like a month before the NFL draft, I was like, I'm ready to start talking about veterans at this point, and here we are. We can finally do it. But yeah, we see it all the time. These year 2 running backs just are such good investments. Like a couple of years ago, we saw Zamir White and Ty Chandler, even though they weren't necessarily good running backs, the opportunity was there, and they were up to NFL speed, and their opportunity came at the right point in the season. Last year, Chase Brown, a year 2 running back, stumbles into a huge workload, ends up being a league winner for just about anybody who picked him up. So definitely like to look at these guys, especially the guys who underperform as rookies, where you can just kind of go back to the well, make the same exact gamble that you made in year 1, but for a much, much cheaper price. So I am constantly trying to look at these year 2, year 3 players that are going to potentially break out because they just seem year over year to just be good investments.
All right, well, enough pussyfooting around from us here. We got a bunch of players we're going to talk about. And JJ, since you are, as I said, the special guest, you get to go first. So talk to us about your first breakout player.
I'm going to be really, really bold with this one. Okay. We're going to get super bold and talk about this guy, Marvin Harrison Jr. Have you guys heard of him before? Yeah, look, I'm actually not, I wouldn't say I'm like bullish versus the market with Marvin Harrison Jr. But I do think that if you're looking at year 2, year 3 breakouts, he's definitely got to be close to the top of the list. It's pretty rare for a player of his prospect quality to just not be at least decent in fantasy football, again, across his first 3 years of his career. So he has a ZAP score of 98.9. It was a little bit worse than where Malik Neighbors was, but right there with Neighbors. Neighbors I think was at like 99.5. There have only been 12 other wide receivers who have been over the 98 mark since 2011, which is when the model dates back to. And the one who probably comps best to Marvin Harrison Jr., this might be a little unfortunate, but from like a ZAP score versus what they did in year one is probably Sammy Watkins. And you can also kind of correlate that to draft capital as well. That's been looking at like peripherals and all that kind of stuff. And he did tail off. Sammy Watkins, obviously, he had a long career, but he didn't have, a career where there were a ton of peaks, but he actually was really good in year two. So that's at least good, from a general comp standpoint. And a comp like that isn't necessarily stylistic. It's more just based on like what the production said and what their prospect scores said. But if you look at all those wide receivers that had a ZAP score over 99, the only one who didn't give you a wide receiver 2 season across their first 3 years in the league was Jerry Jeudy. He was still around like the 13 to 14 PPR point per game range. So he was at least semi close. And then you look at the situation in Arizona. I mean, they did nothing to address the wide receiver position. He's got very similar competition as he did last year. I don't think any of us are worried about like what Michael Wilson might be able to bring to the table, in terms of stealing target share from Marvin Harrison Jr. Obviously, Trey McBride's there. He's going to get his. And then the other thing too is that Arizona became a much more pass-heavy offense towards the end of last season. So hopefully we would see that continue into 2025 as well. I think that they didn't deploy him the way that we would want him to be deployed necessarily, where he didn't really get across the middle of the field very frequently last year. A lot of just kind of throwing him on the outside and letting him just do work only on the perimeter. You got to just kind of cross your fingers and hope that progresses. In situations like this, it's a lot easier to buy into that player if there is like some sort of coaching change or something, because then you're like, oh, good, new coach. Maybe they see the talent that they have and they deploy him differently. That's probably the fear that I would have with Marvin Harrison Jr. is that they're not going to get any more creative. But I think overall, the backbone is there for him to at least have a decent year 2 and year 2 season in the NFL, and at the very least, a good year 3.
Yeah, you want to see some of those layups because we see so many rookies are able to just produce immediately because they're getting that easy stuff. And they were asking him to almost exclusively run these complicated routes deep downfield where the offensive line couldn't even get the protection Kyler Murray needed to get the ball to him. So it was frustrating. And I will say, I wanted to look it up real quickly because when you said Sammy Watkins, I cringed a little bit at my gut reaction there. But, Draft Sharks, they do the injury history. I'm sure you're familiar with that little section on the player pages. Usually when you pull up a player, you'll see 4, 5, 6 injuries on there. I just counted. Sammy Watkins had 22 injuries in his NFL career. So I think we can chalk up a lot of his career to injuries more than anything else because, a former first-round pick who was blazing in year 2 until a plethora of injuries slowed him down. So I actually do like that comp.
We're hearing all the right things, too, about Marvin Harrison Jr., like from Jonathan Gannon and Kyler Murray, and everyone's just sort of on his side where they're just saying like, yeah, like we've barely scratched the surface with what Marvin Harrison Jr. can do. And we expect the big jump, and they're saying all the right things. And we kind of go into every offseason with a second-year player and hearing all the right things, but silver lining, we're not hearing any bad things. We're not hearing he's really got to focus on his work ethic and learn the playbook and get better, stuff like that. So we're hearing all the right things. I've heard that he's even bulked up a little bit. So maybe that sort of changes the usage where we're not seeing this guy that's trying to be this downfield threat, which just seemed off with Marvin Harrison Jr. Guys, before we go on to the rest of our players here, I want to let everybody know that is watching or listening that we've got something awesome for you, that if you are a Football Guys Elite or Hall of Fame premium subscriber, version 3.0 of the Football Guys Rookie Guide is updated and out now for you with fantasy outlooks on over 100 different rookies. We've got all 32 team depth charts with these rookies placed on the depth charts, updated dynasty rankings, rookie draft ADP or average draft position for those of you who don't like acronyms. And this is going to be available, like I said, exclusively for people who are Football Guys Elite and Hall of Fame premium subscribers. So click the link down in the description below. You can go check that out. It's been a labor of love, David. It's been a labor of love for us to put this thing together.
It was a lot of work, but happy that is in the rear view now and we can start looking ahead at NFL depth charts rather than rookies.
Jack Besh, 2025. All right, breakout players. We're back to it. Dave, your turn. We were talking about the Cardinals, and
yeah,
you
I was
want to
gonna
just keep
say,
talking about the Cardinals. Good for
shout
you.
out Cardinals fans. They got to be excited about the start of this show so far. I'm going to talk about Trey Benson. And, when you look at Trey Benson, if you look at the surface level, there wasn't a lot of production last year. The efficiency metrics weren't great on the whole. But as it often is with rookies, I very much so see a tale of two seasons. So the first 4 games, Trey Benson looked terrible. 3.3 yards per carry, 1.4 yards after contact per attempt. And Alfredo, this is something you and I talked about. We liked Trey Benson, the prospect, but he had this tendency to try to bounce plays outside. And he's a guy 6 foot, almost 220 pounds, but he doesn't play with the size that he has. He often relies on his speed. So he got this little mini timeout from weeks 5 through weeks 8, where they gave him just 6 total opportunities. He had 1 game where he didn't even get a snap on the field. And when he came back in those final 6 games of the season, he looked like a much better player. 5.4 yards per attempt, 2.7 yards after contact per attempt. He started breaking tackles at a higher rate. So I don't want to say that he just became a better player, but we do see this a lot. Guys are just kind of shell shocked when they come into the NFL by the speed and the strength of these new guys. And I think sitting behind James Conner, seeing how he played, helped him trust himself a little bit more. So we saw the upside in week 6 or week 10. He had this game against the Jets, 10 carries, 62 yards, 44 of which came after contact, 3 missed tackles for 3 runs of 10 plus yards. And I think that's what we can see going forward, is a guy who can make plays after contact, a guy who can move piles. But unfortunately, James Conner is still there. And typically we see guys at his age start trending down. James Conner, weirdly enough, you can argue that his last 2 seasons have been his most efficient seasons. Like, he's aging like fine wine. But at the end of the day, he does turn 30 this year. He's going to be 31 next year. You start looking ahead at his contract, the Cardinals can save $8 million if they release him after the 2025 season. So you've got to imagine, as they start looking at their books and trying to plan for the future, they want to see what they have in Trey Benson. This is a guy they invested a 2nd-round pick in last year. They want to see if they could save that money and make Trey Benson the running back of the future. So I think we see that workload grow a little bit this year. Connor's not going to be pushed completely out of the picture. He's still going to be there in 2025, but I think that we see that push to more of a split this year, and hopefully he can take over as the lead back going into 2026.
So I'm going to be extra nice every time JJ speaks, but I'm going to continue to be a party pooper every time you speak, Dave, just because that's how this show
As is
goes.
tradition, yes.
Yeah. So I've got some poop. Trey Benson. If with the whole James Conner thing, the contract, right? Like, they do have some pretty similar styles that they play with here. I know that you're saying, right, he's 30. The injuries have piled up. Probably not there for the long term in Arizona. Do you trust, and this is open to both of you guys, JJ, I mean, you can answer first. Like, do you guys trust that Trey Benson, or that really with any prospect, we see the 3rd-year breakout? Once they've been there for a while and they haven't really produced, like, what's the expectation for this season, and what's the likelihood that we actually see a guy kind of break out the way we want to, where he gives you back that dynasty value you've been looking to have?
Yeah,
JJ,
I mean, I can speak from at least like what the year 2 model is saying and showing me, and what we've seen historically from this kind of profile. So I even said in his write-up, because I do the year 2 profile write-ups in the prospect guide and stuff, and in his write-up, I literally said Benson may or may not be good. Like, we don't really know what
Right.
Trey Benson is just yet. Like, I don't the model itself from his prospect profile standpoint wasn't like overly bullish on him. And it saw, I think some of the same things that you guys were talking about in terms of, his overall profile. Wasn't like an outstanding pass catcher, which is something that, the model is going to really, really enjoy and like seeing. But regardless of all of that, in the year 2 model and in the prospect model as well, but I started this year categorizing players to kind of give people an idea of what their individual scores kind of mean. And he was categorized in the year 2 model as a flex play. And if you look at historical flex plays in the model, they provide us like an RB2-ish type season at in years 2 and 3 at a sub 13% rate. So it's not a great rate, right? Like, it's not it's 2 tiers down. You get elite producers, weekly starters, and flex plays, right? And so the other thing too is that if you look at the list of players who fall into the flex play category and then who ended up panning out, a lot of them were guys who didn't do much year 1 because of injury, and they had the backbone of being good. Travis Etienne being one, Dalvin Cook being another. So these players who didn't play enough year 1 to really trigger any sort of like additional points to their prospect score. And that's why, they were thrown into that flex play category. But interestingly enough, one of the guys who did emerge from the flex play category was James Conner, where Conner in year 2, you had the whole Le'Veon Bell situation going on, and Conner was able to see that workload. The problem is, Trey Benson, to your point, Alfredo, like he's staring at a situation that's not that, where he's not walking into a backfield that, is wide open the way that it was in Pittsburgh, during Conner's year 2. So I'm a little bit concerned about Benson being more than a handcuff, basically. But I do think that, from, going to what Kluge's saying, like, if you are to pinpoint a handcuff to go after, it would probably be a guy who had decent draft capital, was at least a decent prospect, and is running behind a 30-year-old running back who, prior to the last, like he's had injury issues throughout his history. So I do think there's at least some reason there to say that he's like at least a higher end handcuff.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I mean, I'm not expecting him to come out week 1 pushing for a 50% snap share and taking work away from James Conner. But I think what we could see is towards the end of the season when, you see these running backs just start popping up on the waiver wire and the guys that you're taking from your bench that you've held on to for 12 weeks, putting them in your starting lineup. I could see the scale start to tip in that direction late in the season as they start to look at that $8 million price tag. Well, it's $10.5 million. They can take $2.5 million dead cap if they choose to move on. So that's kind of the hope here, is that we get some late season production from him. And then that rolls over into year 3. Of course, though, yeah, like you said, did hardly anything as a rookie. I mean, you can look at one good game and you can look at a handful of good snaps, but there wasn't really a ton that we saw his rookie season that we can definitively say he's a good or not good player. So I'm just kind of going back to the prospect that I liked coming into last year.
Yeah, there's kind of an avenue for both things as the Cardinals go down to the end of the season. They're either saying, hey, we're vying for a playoff spot. Let's keep all of our running backs fresh and let's get Trey Benson on the field. Or they're saying, hey, this season's done. Let's see what we have in Trey Benson and give him some work. So it's like, yeah, Dave, I think like no matter what, it just depends on how many chapters long this book is, but it probably has the same ending when we get there. JJ, this next player has me very excited. I'm curious to see how he does this year. And for now, I'm going to take the L on this because I remember going on your show and saying I liked this player better than Ladd McConkey as a prospect. And I felt really good on draft day when he went in the first round. And, the rookie season was kind of all over the place. But there's a lot of high hopes for Ricky Pearsall here in year 2.
Yeah, there is. I do think, though, if you were to just be, and this is kind of the way that I approach the evaluation of like an individual players, and I want to poke holes into, they all kind of start as this like perfect player, and then you just kind of poke holes as to where things could go wrong and where the red flags are. And I think for him, the obvious red flags is that his production wasn't that great in year 1, right? He averaged 8.5 PPR points per game. I know that there were stretches down, like especially down the stretch towards the end of the season, where that number was much, much higher. But season long points per game, 8.5, not very strong. Yards per route run, 1.31, also not very strong. You really want a rookie wide receiver to usually get over like that 1.5 mark in yards per route run. But if you just look at those two things, 8.5 points per game, 1.31 yards per route, 1.31 yards per route run, among the wide receivers in the year 2 model who are below a 10 point per game mark and a 1.5 yards per route run. So relatively significantly higher than where Ricky Pearsall was last year. And they ran a minimum 50 routes, in their rookie season. When removing 2023 and 2024, because they haven't played 3 years in the NFL yet, there are over 150 players that then fall into that bucket. So Ricky Pearsall would be in this bucket as well. The only players who scored 14 or more PPR points per game in either year 2 or year 3, I'll just read them because there's not that many of them. Alshon Jeffrey, Allen Hurns, DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Adams, Tyler Boyd, DJ Chark, Michael Gallup, Michael Pittman, and Nico Collins. So there are hits, but it's not a great hit rate. So I do think that, when we look at the situation and see that, of course, here's the favorable pieces, right? I mean, I liked him as a prospect as well because he had a really well-rounded profile. He was older, and so that did ding him a little bit on my end. But he had draft capital, fell into a pretty good situation, and that situation is even better here in year 2 because Brandon Ayuk isn't going to probably be ready to start the season. They got rid of Deebo Samuel, and so Ricky Pearsall is going to be out there in all of their base offensive sets. I mean, he's going to be out there whether they're running 11 personnel or 12. And so we'll see him on the field quite a bit, which means he has an opportunity. And not only that, he's competing with Juwan Jennings, which I like Juwan Jennings, and he was great last year. But again, let's just try to see all angles to these players, not just be like, Juwan Jennings is a monster and he can do no bad. I mean, like, he was an older breakout. And what happens if things kind of regress a little bit for a guy like Jennings? So situationally, that's why I think you can buy into Pearsall entering year 2, despite, the more questionable numbers that he provided in year 1. I'm like I said, I'm far from a Pearsall truther at this point, but I think you can at least explain away some of what happened in year 1 with the fact that he got shot, wasn't able to play to start the season, didn't get normal reps, which we know are very, very valuable. I mean, even like guys like Jackson Smith and Jigba have talked about that when he had that wrist injury to start his rookie season, and that gets them off to a rough start. And it's not easy to just bounce back from that as a first-year NFL player in the middle of a season, right? So I think that also kind of plays into the narrative of like him performing better down the stretch, right? With Pearsall just kind of getting the groove and like understanding the game a little bit better. So, I think that we have to be aware of what's going on. And not only that, the guys who did hit within those parameters, the only one who didn't have like a pretty decent prospect score was Alan Hearn. So a lot of them like had a good baseline entering the year. And that's the other thing to keep in mind, is that all those guys that I named were basically day 1 or day 2 picks. So that's another favorable thing for Pearsall. So I'll say that, I think the market is kind of doing its thing and is probably right with Pearsall, but I'll call him out at least as a breakout.
Yeah, I completely agree. And for the guy I'm going to talk about later, I wanted to look at guys who kind of did nothing their rookie season and then broke out later, because we do see that, and especially guys that miss preseason. You talk about Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think that's the best recent example, but we saw it with Michael Pittman too. He got hurt his rookie season, didn't do a lot, broke out in year 2. Jameson Williams, basically a 0 his rookie season. Look at what he's doing now. Robert Meacham, Jordan Love, Kyron Williams, Dalvin Cook, Travis Etienne, Travis Kelce. There's a lot of these guys who get hurt early in their careers, and it's just so hard to ever get up to speed there. So I think the fact that Ricky Pearsall was even able to find his way on the field is a miracle in and of itself. The fact that he emerged as one of the top pass catchers there, like you go back and watch that game against Detroit, I think that's a perfect example of what we could expect from Ricky Pearsall long term. He was getting deep downfield. They were throwing the ball to him on screens. They were getting jet sweeps to him. They were doing whatever they could to get the ball in his hand. And I think he's that type of player where he can emerge as this, I don't want to say Debo type of player, but a very versatile weapon that can run every single route, can take plays, or make plays after the catch. So I love that call out. And I think the market, especially after the Debo trade, has started to steam him up a little bit, but I still don't think it's caught up to just how high his ceiling can be.
Dave, the people want to know, is he this year's Debo Samuel? I'm just kidding. Don't answer
probably
that.
Not.
Please don't.
Probably not.
Don't answer that. Don't. Yeah. Also, the Niners defense got, like, I think considerably worse too.
Yeah.
This might be a team that has to pass more than they usually have in the past. Well, I've got a player here. I decided to go a different route because nobody was talking about these positions. So quarterback. And this one I would say is a little obvious, but I still want to talk about him because just seeing where he is in like a lot of dynasty rankings and fantasy rankings. Drake Maye, quarterback for the New England Patriots, I think is just going to be such a fun player to watch, where the fantasy ADP is, where the dynasty value is. There's a much improved ecosystem over there in New England right now. And we see they drafted 2 good rookie offensive linemen, signed 3 free agent offensive linemen. You add the weapons like Stephon Diggs, Trevion Henderson, who, like, Dave, you and I have talked about this before. Trevion Henderson doesn't get enough love as a pass blocker, which is just going to be huge for, like, he's going to be in on all the passing downs, whether as a weapon, a release out of the backfield, or as a pass blocker, which is just going to be big for Drake Maye. And the other thing that I think we all talk about, but it hasn't, I don't know if it's quite hit the fantasy zeitgeist yet, is how much that rushing upside remains with Drake Maye. It was interesting. I looked it up, and he averaged more rushing yards per game last season than Josh Allen. The big difference with Josh Allen is all of the touchdowns he got. Drake Maye and Patriots were basically never in scoring position, so that didn't really help his cause. But also highest yards per carry among quarterbacks with at least 8 games played. So there's big play potential there in the rushing game. He's going to run the ball, at least I would assume. Maybe that gets changed a little bit this year with Josh McDaniels in there. But we saw that there is potential for him to be a consistent top 12 quarterback. He was top 12 fantasy quarterback in 40% of his games played, and top 16 in 80% of his games played last season. So, I mean, we see a guy who right now he's kind of going at cost, at least in fantasy. He's being ranked around quarterback 17. In Dynasty, he's around quarterback 9, which I think he could outplay that this year and probably finish the season being ranked somewhere around quarterback 5 or 6 in Dynasty. If you're talking about like trade charts and values and stuff like that, he's just going to be 23 years old at the start of the season. So he's still young. It's an improving team. Yeah, I think sky's the limit for Drake Maye. I think that's going to be one of those quarterbacks I'm going to be targeting a lot. Probably not in Dynasty because I don't think anyone's giving up their Drake Maye shares, but in fantasy, I think that's probably going to be one of my big late round quarterback guys.
JJ, I really want to talk to you and pick your brain on this a little bit because late round quarterback, it was a very viable.
You have familiarity with that, JJ, right?
Yeah, you know a little bit, but you've also talked recently about how you get these positional advantages from Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, and that it's okay to pay up for those guys as well, and you could still build a competent team there. Where does a guy like Drake Maye fall? And not just Drake Maye. I think that you look at a lot of these young quarterbacks, Drake Maye, Bo Nix, Caleb Williams. I think Jaden Daniels probably moves up into that elite tier that you're okay paying up for. But with some of these guys, Drake Maye is probably going to be more of a mid-round pick than a true late-round pick. Do you still think it's okay to bet on somebody like Maye or even the other names I threw out, Bo Nix, Caleb Williams, maybe even a JJ McCarthy, who's probably going to go a little bit later? Are those still good picks to make, even if you have to pay for them in, the 12th, 13th, 14th round of your fantasy draft?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're getting them that late, for sure. The one thing that I've researched a lot, especially last year, was what I've called the pocket passer trap. And it's basically like if you're in the top 6 QB range and into the middle rounds a little bit, you generally want to avoid pocket passers. So last year, the easy go-to example was CJ Stroud. Yep. He was just an easy avoid. And I know I'm saying this in hindsight, and people are like, yeah, I'm sure, like it was. You can listen to my old podcast. Like I talked about avoiding CJ.
And I'm sure this year you'd say Joe Burrow probably falls into that. Yeah, right? Like the guy going as QB6 without the rushing upside.
You're gonna have players who beat this trend, because they are in circumstances that are just unbelievably favorable. Like Burrow. I think Burrow probably still is okay enough just because of the situation and surroundings, and that defense is still the way that it is, and they'll probably be pretty pass heavy. But like, in order for Burrow to be as relevant as he was last year, he needed all of these things to really fall into place for him, where you get, just a really pass heavy offense, just a really crappy defense, and you have, towers at wide receiver and such. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the middle rounds last year, like Jordan Love, like Dak Prescott, like there's a bunch of dudes who just didn't pan out. I know Dak got hurt, but wasn't really doing his thing even before. And so when you look at someone like Drake Maye, or even Caleb Williams, who I think Maye probably has a little bit more rushing upside than a guy like Caleb, but Caleb still has some rushing upside. If you look at middle round quarterbacks, so I'll say like mid to late QB1s versus high end QB2s, and if the high end QB2s are mobile and the mid range QB1s are immobile, the mobile QB2s outperform the immobile QB1s at an absurd rate. Like you want to have the mobility far more than just the pocket passer and quarterback, because we're going to just think of it this way, like pocket passers, their production's really coming down to touchdown rate and their ability to throw a lot of touchdowns. There's an obscene amount of volatility when it comes to touchdown rate. Like if the example I always would share, like in my guide and stuff, is that if you looked at, we could use it even like this year. If you looked at Jalen or Drake Maye, let's say Drake Maye versus Jordan Love, and you say, who's going to throw more touchdowns between the two? And we would probably say probably Jordan Love. Like he probably has, a better outlook in terms of passing production. Or maybe we could even say Dak Prescott now that George Pickens is on the team, right? And we'll say, oh yeah, probably Dak Prescott will probably have more touchdowns. But there's a possibility that Drake Maye throws more touchdown passes than Dak Prescott this year. Whereas if you ask the exact same question about mobility, who's going to have more rushing production? Drake Maye. Like easily. Flat out, no one would argue otherwise. It's because it's stickier than what we see from passing production. So, I mean, like I think that those guys, we are sort of morphing into, because of last year's quarterback class, we're morphing into a time in fantasy football where it could start to be like what we saw back in 2012 to 2015 a little bit more, where we got an influx of quarterback play and it became a lot deeper. And because it was as deep as it was, the edge that the top guys were giving you wasn't as dramatic. Now, the difference now is that all of these QB1s are mobile, right? Whereas before, we didn't have that many unicorn. We didn't have any unicorn QB1s like we do now, like Lamar, Jalen, etc. But now we could realistically see a scenario where we're 12 deep at quarterback, where 12 guys are giving you both good passing and mobile numbers and rushing numbers. And I think Drake Maye could easily be part of that group.
So what I'm kind of hearing, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but pass on the Jordan Loves and the Baker Mayfields and those guys and wait for those young guys with the rushing upside like Drake Maye and Bo Nix and Caleb Williams.
The interesting thing, though, is that like last year, we saw 2 quarterbacks in particular run the ball a lot more than we expected. One of them being Baker and then one of them being Brock Purdy out of nowhere. Like Brock Purdy had low key decent rushing production last year. So you're going to get some of that too, where last year was kind of an outlier from that standpoint. Usually it's not even usually we would only get like 0 to 1 of those kinds of players, but keep that in mind as well. But yeah, like generally speaking, I'm going to go for the upside second year quarterback who has mobility, who I can get later than the pocket passer veteran who I know has a cap ceiling.
Yeah. Rather than hoping Baker Mayfield just decides to think he's Lamar Jackson at age 30. Right. Yeah.
At rushing quarterback feels like it's become a necessity for this generation of fantasy football. It's almost like having the GPS built into the car. Like our generation has no idea how to get anywhere without GPS already in there. Yeah. It just feel like that's what you need. That's kind of become your skeleton key for something that like has to work in fantasy is the rushing quarterback at this point. Well, guys, we got a bunch of players left on here, but I'm excited because these are a lot of players that aren't talked about very often. So I'm curious to hear a lot of our reasonings here. JJ, you wanted to talk about Roschon Johnson, running back for the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, so Roschon was someone that I actually had as a buy at the beginning of the offseason because oftentimes, we go into draft season and we're like, oh, this team is definitely going to do this. And then the Cowboys for 2 straight years don't get a running back, right? Like just stuff like that. It happens all the time where we make way too many assumptions about backfields. Now, whenever I made that argument, I didn't make the argument because I thought that Roschon Johnson was some special talent. But we obviously now have the draft over, and the Bears didn't address the running back position until round 7 when they got Kyle Monangai. And to me, when you look at the backfield right now, yes, Monangai is much more of a Roschon Johnson replacement than a DeAndre Swift replacement, if you will, right? Like they're more of the same archetype between the tackles, runners, maybe not high receiving upside, whereas DeAndre Swift is the shifty, receiving guy out of that backfield. If you want to make the comparison to Ben Johnson's offenses, DeAndre Swift is Jahmyr Gibbs, whereas Monangai and Roschon Johnson are the David Montgomerys of this backfield, right? But I mean, look, if you want to just look at this strictly from a prospect standpoint, because if we're going to sit here and battle, is it going to be Monangai or is it going to be Roschon? I'm going to look at their prospect profiles and say, okay, which one was generally better? And I don't think I think we'd all agree that Roschon hasn't necessarily gotten the fairest shot so far in the NFL. In Chicago. So I do think that looking at the prospect profile is still relevant to some degree. But if you look at Monangai versus Roschon, identical best season reception shares in college pretty much. But again, Roschon played behind Bijan Robinson in college, whereas Monangai was not playing behind arguably the best running back in football right now in college. Monangai had a speed score of just 94. That's below average. That's almost to the point where the model's like, alert, this guy does not have good size speed. Roschon was close to 100, which is a lot more on the average side. Roschon registered a breakout score, which is receiving yards per team pass attempt adjusted for strength of schedule and age. His breakout score was 47 in college, which just 50s average. So it was just right below average. Kyle Monangai didn't have a breakout score. He had a 0 breakout score, which happens to some players who don't have good receiving numbers. And so get this, in the Zap model's history, of the almost 70 running backs, and this is from 2011 to 2022 to give these guys at least 3 years to play in the league, of the almost 70 running backs who didn't have a breakout score, only Stephen Ridley, Alfred Morris, and Lamar Miller scored 12 or more PPR points per game in either year 1 to year 3. Stephen Ridley and Lamar Miller both had top 100 draft capital. So you're really looking at Alfred Morris as the Kyle Monangai out, if you will, if you want to look at history, right? And I'm not going to sit here and bet on Alfred Morris happening again, right? I'm not. And look, I looked at Alfred Morris's profile this morning, actually, and I'm like, how did this guy work? I don't understand.
What a way to start your day. Sorry. Just
Shanahan,
sipping your coffee looking at Alfred Morris profiles.
I think that's how it works. Shanahan just fed him a bunch of volume. That was pretty much it.
Right. And so you can sit here and say, maybe, look, like the running back position comes down to a coaching decision, and how we view these guys in fantasy football. We have to consider that more than at wide receiver, where wide receivers have to have the talent to get open and then get fed the rock. And of course, scheme and coaching matters at wide receiver as well, but it matters so much at running back. If a coach sits there and says, I want to split this backfield up, he'll split the backfield up. And then all of a sudden, these guys don't matter in fantasy football. Najee Harris was a relevant fantasy football running back in Pittsburgh, very relevant, despite the fact that he was just glaringly average, right? Just the most average running back imaginable. And so we could sit here and say that, maybe Ben Johnson, this is his draft pick, his only running back draft pick. And maybe he really likes Kyle Monangai and he feeds Kyle Monangai. I've been throwing random 4th round darts at Monangai in rookie drafts. Why not? It could happen. But I do want to say this about Roschon, is that if you just look at last year, he was better than DeAndre Swift, in rushing yards over expected per attempt. He was by far better in EPA per attempt. He didn't fumble the ball, and he had a success rate that was 45.5%, which is really solid at running back. That's based on EPA. DeAndre Swift's success rate was 12 percentage points lower than Roschon's. I really don't think that Roschon Johnson is that bad. I think he's probably a replacement level type back. But what if the Bears don't go out and do anything to address the backfield and they stick with these 3 guys? I'm going to bet on Roschon Johnson over Kyle Monangai at this point.
Yeah, I'm a big Roschon fan, and I think that you hit the nail on the head. He just hasn't really been given the opportunity yet, and it's really frustrating, but it's been multiple coaching staff since he's been drafted. He's always had that guy ahead of him, but I think that it's so easy to kind of look at him being the guy that plays that Jamal Williams, David Montgomery type of role in Ben Johnson's offense. And Monangai, man, my feelings on Monangai have been a roller coaster all off.
He's so fun to watch.
He is, right. And I'm very blunt about my rookie process and how I do this. I start with the numbers, then I look at the highlights, and then I start digging into game film. So when you start with the numbers, just the raw basic numbers, Monangai is pretty exciting. And then you watch the highlights and you're like, this guy's great. And then you start watching more games and you're like, oh, that's why he's falling around 7. Then he comes down in the combine and just does abysmal at the combine as well and just keeps falling down draft boards. But then, like you said, he's the only running back that's been selected by Ben Johnson. But even that, if you look closer at it, I don't think that they went into the draft saying, we're going to wait until round 7 and get Kyle Monangai.
Right.
That's our guy. They got sniped by Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. And then when it came to round 4, there was that huge run of receivers or running backs where Cam Scadaboo and Bashal Tootin and Woody Marks went off the board. And the Bears were so upset that they missed that run that they traded back from that pick. And then again in round 6, there was another running back run. So they just kept falling at the tail end of these runs and not getting the running backs they want. I think Kyle Monangai was just like we need a running back. He's the best guy available, but I don't think that because they drafted him, it means that they have huge plans for him.
Yeah. The other thing I want to add is that I do think that there's a better chance than almost any other team in the NFL that the Bears do get like a J.K. Dobbins or like a Nick Chubb or something like
Chubb.
that. Right?
So
I think we need to preface with that. This is more of a cost benefit analysis, expected value analysis, where with Roschon right now, he'll be drafted in the RB 50s, right? Like somewhere like 55 or something like that, right? But if you look at projections, like my projections right now have him at RB 40. Mike Clay's, who's the sort of the gold standard, is very much in line with where my projections are at for him. And so you're getting a pretty good value if things do remain the same at this point. And then on top of that, that's in a backfield that is going to be split. And so if something were to happen to DeAndre Swift in season, Roschon Johnson as a lead back would be an RB2 probably. So there is some upside there. There is a path, and we don't get many paths like this for not only 2nd or 3rd year guys, but just running backs in general that are going this late.
Yeah, I mean, Dave's heart is soaring with the Eagles nest right now. We just did 10 minutes of Bears backfield talk. I know you're on cloud 9 right now, Dave. Yeah. Use this energy. Let's get it. Who's your next guy?
Let's talk about we'll go to JJ's team now, and we'll talk a little bit about the Steelers. And I'm going to be honest, I'm going to keep this one super short because there's really only so much I can talk about. Yeah, Roman Wilson played 5 snaps last year. What are we supposed to say about Roman Wilson's rookie season, except for the fact that we have listed, all of these players who were injured in preseason, injured their rookie season, and then came out and broke out in year 2. So all a bet on Roman Wilson is basically a bet on the same guy that you were betting on last year, except now you're getting him for a fraction of the cost. I mean, you can draft this guy in the final round of your drafts. He might get steamed up a little bit now because we've got word of this George Pickens trade, but I look at how he would complement DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf is a guy who likes getting deep downfield, likes running these posts across the middle of the field, and Roman Wilson is a lot like Tyler Lockett, the guy who can do the underneath stuff, be more of that safety valve across the middle of the field. So I see two very complementary skill sets here. I liked Roman Wilson a lot as a prospect, and I can't stop thinking about that Mike Tomlin quote where he said it's really hard to jump on a moving train in regards to why Roman Wilson wasn't getting snaps. And it wasn't just that he wasn't getting snaps either. Like, first padded practice of the preseason, high ankle sprain, and then he missed the first 4 weeks. He comes back out, gets 5 snaps, and then immediately injures his hamstring and goes on IR. So really just throwing his rookie season away and re-rolling on a prospect that I like. I'm interested to see where his value falls now in the fallout of this George Pickens trade, but just a prospect that I liked. The opportunity could be there, and he's basically free now.
JJ, where are you at after the George Pickens trade? Like Pittsburgh, Dallas, who's up, who's down? Because that's the people want this.
Yeah. You mentioned that I'm a Steelers fan because I am born and raised Pittsburgh. I haven't lived there in I don't know 10 or actually longer than that, like 15 years now. And actually this morning, a side note, so we have relatives that are Ravens fans, and when the Ravens played and beat the Steelers earlier this past season, they sent my kids, my daughter and my son, Lamar Jackson jerseys. And today, my son at his daycare had Purple Day, and the only purple shirt he had was a Lamar. I sent my son to school in a Lamar Jackson jersey today.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
Which 20-year-old JJ would be punching current age JJ in the face after seeing that. But yeah, I mean, like, I think the Pickens trade, obviously, I have a ton of friends and stuff still in Pittsburgh and who are Steelers fans and whatnot. And the reaction is, well, what are they going to do at wide receiver? And I'm like, you guys don't know Arthur Smith's offense. I mean, he does not care about what they're doing. They're going to get Allen Lazard, and they're going to love life after getting Allen Lazard and pairing him with Aaron Rodgers and having a run blocking wide receiver and letting DK Metcalf get a 28% target share. He's going to just be used like they used Drake London, and maybe even like an AJ Brown a little bit whenever Arthur Smith was in Tennessee, and let him, gobble up a lot of those looks. And then, yeah, I mean, like, I think we'll see like Calvin Austin's still there. I think they like Calvin Austin, and he obviously has some explosive ability. And so it'll probably, I think the Roman Wilson thing will be more of a second half developmental thing. As the season goes on, if he's able to find the field and really live up to expectation. And the Steelers have a pretty decent history of hitting on, day 2 wide receivers. So I think that there's enough reason to be interested there. With the Pickens trade going to Dallas, I said to you guys before we started recording, but like, I think overall it's probably a net win for fantasy football. I don't think Pickens necessarily sees a massive upgrade or downgrade, but just because, he is going to a team that has a better alpha, but from a projection standpoint, they're going to throw the ball a lot more than what Pittsburgh's going to see. So I think, his target share might take a little bit of a hit, but he should see just as much, if not more volume in Dallas, which is good. And then, DK Metcalf, like I said, going to see probably a 28% target share now. Like, we're probably going to project him for at least like a 26 to 28% target share. And so, that's great for his fantasy value. And don't forget about Pat Freiermuth either, who, Arthur Smith's offenses like to utilize a tight end, annoyingly so, because sorry. Arthur Smith's offenses like to utilize the tight end too. I should have thrown that out there.
Darnell Washington, wheels up.
Yeah, right. But no, I mean, like, we know that tight ends are going to be used in that offense, and Freiermuth has been a proven veteran who can give us like low end tight end 1 production. I think that's a little bit more locked in now. Like, we can feel a little bit better about him, at least giving us something. He's not the kind of tight end that I'm going to like be super attracted to in fantasy, just because we know the ceiling's probably not there. But if you just need, if you're in a 2 tight end league or a tight end premium type league, and you can get a guy kind of a little bit later, like, he's solid enough. I don't see why he wouldn't be someone that we would be as excited as like Jake Ferguson, who also took somewhat of a hit because George Pickens is now in Dallas. But so I think net overall, probably a win for fantasy football in general.
I like your thoughtful, insightful, and nuanced take on this, JJ, because I saw a guy at the gym this morning and he was wearing a Steelers shirt. And I said,
Mm.
"Hey, man, did you see the news? George Pickens is gone. What are your thoughts?" And he said, "Good bleeping riddance," and then put his headphones back in.
Yeah,
So
that's
I got a little more thoughtful analysis from you on this
I
one.
mean, look, if I log into Facebook, which I try not to do these days, but if I log into Facebook, all it is people complaining about Mike Tomlin. Like
Yeah.
still, like in the middle of May, they'll just be complaining about Mike Tomlin.
Facebook, a known happy place for good conversation.
Good conversation.
Yeah, yeah. Good vibes there. All right, we got 3 more players here. And JJ, this is another one. Makes me very happy to see this guy on the list. But there's a lot that's kind of in flux over in Buffalo in the backfield.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, Buffalo was a team that I think a lot of us pegged as if they don't get rid of James Cook in the draft, around the draft, because we know that there's like been contract negotiations and stuff like that. If they don't get rid of him, they're probably not going to do anything to add to this backfield because they feel they have other holes they need to fill, and they were fine, from a production standpoint there. And James Cook is obviously good. The thing with Cook, though, is that he's not frequently a 60% plus running back rush share kind of guy. He's just incredibly efficient. He obviously scored a lot of touchdowns last year, and there's some regression that's going to come there. But he's usually going to be like in that 50% to 60% range, which leaves a lot of looks for backup running backs in that offense. They like Ty Johnson and what he can do as a receiver. But I think that if you were to see a James Cook injury happen, we would see Ray Davis get elevated quite a bit. He, to me, was a really good, well-rounded running back coming out. He was, I mean, honestly, he's not unlike, especially like his age profile, his production profile. He's like a less explosive, like RJ Harvey in a way where, it's that like bowling ball coming at you, can make those explosive plays. I think Harvey, I'm just trying to make it relevant for some of the rookies that people have top of mind right now. But, Harvey's probably more explosive than Davis, but Davis showed off some explosive ability in year one. He's actually in that same, he has a really, really close score to Trey Benson in the year 2 model. He actually has a slightly better score than Trey Benson because he just had better year 1 production. And the model, the ZAP model, the prospect model did like Ray Davis a decent bit despite his age. So like I said, I already said this statistic earlier, but 12.3% of players in this flex play category end up giving us an RB2 or better season in year 2 or year 3. This is going to come down to, is James Cook going to be healthy? And he's, that means that Ray Davis is more than likely just a handcuff, but I don't think he's a bad handcuff because I think he's a capable running back who can take on a 3-down workload. And that's valuable, especially in an offense like Buffalo's.
Dave, how do you feel about not Ray Davis, but James Cook right now in Dynasty and in fantasy? Because it feels very much like an eye of the beholder thing. I think there are some people that are just like worried and they're out, and the rankings just feel like they're all over the place.
Yeah, James Cook is a player that I've been a little bit confused by over the last couple of years because I don't see him with this workhorse profile, but they have been hellbent on giving him that workload, and he's been okay with it. I think unless he budges on that asking price, $15 million is a lot of money for a running back. I don't think that he's going to get that. I've heard a lot of smoke about him potentially being traded, that, the Bills are exploring trades there. But either way, I mean, whether James Cook is there or not, they invested in Ray Davis. He's a good running back. He's got a 3-down skill set. So whether they use him as a goal line back or a pass catching back, he's got multiple outs to fantasy relevance. I don't know what the future looks like for James Cook, but either way, Ray Davis is a guy that I'm aggressively targeting late in my drafts.
Well, none of us know what the future looks like. Sorry, just figured I'd put that out there.
The world might end tomorrow.
Yeah,
as Kyle Shanahan says.
Famous words. Okay, we got 2 players left here, and I'm kind of lazy, so I'm going to use the same joke that I did in like week 16 waiver wire. Go and get you some Strange, because I'm kind of into Brenton Strange here as one of these like late round tight end guys you can look at in fantasy, and honestly just a really cheap player you can go get in a dynasty trade right now. And it's similar to Drake Maye, where you've got a player that's now in a different ecosystem where Evan Ingram is off the Jags. He's in Denver. Gabe Davis just got released this morning, so he could take his 20 catches elsewhere. And then you add Travis Hunter in the draft. And I get that Travis Hunter is going to be catching a lot of passes there in Jacksonville. And so much of what he does is probably going to be in the screen game because that's where he's been so effective. And Liam Cohen likes to do that. But with Liam Cohen in there as the head coach, we actually have a decent track record of a guy who not only utilizes a single tight end, but the tight ends produce for fantasy. And when he was the offensive coordinator for the Rams back in 2022, you've got Tyler Higbee, who's the tight end 10 in points per game. And then last season for the Bucks, Cade Otton's the tight end 11 in points per game. And I know that a lot of that came from when we got the injury to Chris Godwin, and then Mike Evans missed a couple games here and there. But even when Godwin was on the field early in the season, weeks 1 through 7, Otton was 6th in receptions amongst tight ends and 10th in fantasy points. So there's Dave, like we always like to say, there's a world where Brenton Strange actually does have a path the same way that Cade Otton and Jake Ferguson and a lot of these guys did to being a top 12 relevant tight end. And we kind of saw, I don't want to say a preview, but we saw some of it last year when Evan Ingram was missing time. Brenton Strange was a top 9 fantasy tight end and half of his starts replacing Evan Ingram. And it's just, I know it was hit or miss. There was times where he was just outside the top 24, but I mean, he even had a massive game where he was tight end 2 overall that week. And there was something interesting that I noticed, which is whenever Brenton Strange played 80% of the snaps, he was a top 10 fantasy tight end. Now, gonna give the context here so it doesn't sound as cool. That was twice last season. But
I was like, wow, that's kind of sweet.
Yeah, cool stat, man. No, it happened in 2 games. He hit above an 80% snap share, and he was a top 9 tight end. However, when I went and I looked at those same guys I mentioned earlier, Cade Otton and Tyler Higbee, Cade Otton didn't have a single game below 80% snaps last year, and Tyler Higbee back in 2022 had just 2 games below an 80% snap share, and it was like 78% or 68%, stuff like that. So I think there's just a good chance that we see a lot of Brenton Strange out there for the Jaguars offense, a team that you can kind of tell they don't necessarily trust the running backs they have there in that backfield, so we could see a lot of passing from Trevor Lawrence, and there's really no one else in this depth chart besides there's Johnny Munt and Hunter Long. I mean, sure, give me Brenton Strange, the guy with the 9+ RAS score, athletic guy. I think we're going to see some good run after catch for him as well. In Dynasty, he's like around tight end 23. I think that's just throw someone a 3rd round pick for this guy who just doesn't know what they have. And honestly, fantasy, I want to point this out. Most rankings I see, consensus rankings, have him outside the top 24. Football guys right now ahead of the curve a little bit. They have him at around tight end 18. So it's pretty cool. Pretty cool. Good job, football guys. You seem like you know what you're doing there.
That 2023 class was kind of loaded with tight ends, and I think Strange was kind of the forgotten guy there. You look, Dalton Kincaid, Sam Laporta, Michael Mayer, Luke Musgrave, Luke Schumacher all went before Brenton Strange, and then Tucker Kraft, Darnell Washington after. So he just kind of ended up being the forgotten guy for whatever reason.
Do I remember that correctly? He was a 2nd round pick?
He was, yeah. So he's got the draft capital as well, and drafted young too. He was just 22 his rookie season, so definitely opportunity for growth there. I think the one thing is obviously he's going to be behind Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter, who are probably taking 60% of the targets just for themselves. So he will be getting the scraps left over. But you look, I mean, Diami Brown is the current wide receiver 3 on that depth chart. I think it's very, very likely that Strange is 3rd on the team in targets, and we've seen that offense. Even though it's kind of changed a lot, Trevor Lawrence does like having a tight end that can work in the short areas of the field, across the middle of the field. That's where he's really comfortable throwing the ball. So I like the call out.
Yeah, the other thing to add too is like he's like right on the fringe of being athletic, like the kind of athlete we want in like a high-end tight end 1, right? For that kind of ceiling. He's like right on the fringe. Whereas like a guy like Cade Otton was not. Like Cade Otton's not that much of an athlete, and players like that. So I do think there's at least like, you could go either way, with from an athletic profile standpoint. But yeah, I mean, like I think he's going to be 3rd on the team in targets if everyone's healthy, and then if there's an injury, then if Travis Hunter or Brian Thomas get hurt, then he's number 2 on the team in targets, and that's going to be a pass heavy team. Which, by the way, Alfredo, I will not take the Pearsall Tootin slander that you threw out there.
No, it was not slander. It was that they don't trust the other running backs. Okay, hence the Pearsall Tootin pick.
Okay, good.
Yeah, no slander. Well, a little bit of slander, but we're not going to do that on this episode. We got one guy left here, JJ, and this one's, I think, probably the most interesting because this is probably the guy who's ranked lowest in Dynasty and in fantasy and essentially free. So I'm curious about this one. Isaiah Davis is who you have here.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably on some shallower Dynasty waiver wires at this point.
Yeah.
He's definitely not being drafted in redraft. But this is just one of those scenarios where small sample stuff is not very predictive. So I'm not trying to sell it that way. He was though really efficient last season on his limited touches. He had some usability down the stretch last year whenever Brees Hall was banged up. On his 30 rush attempts, he had a rushing yards over expected per attempt of plus 1.4 yards, which is pretty absurd. A rushing expected points added of plus 4.9 in total, a success rate of almost 57%. He was on a per touch basis. Again, yes, it's an unbelievably small sample, but on a per touch basis, he was way better than the other backs in that backfield last year. Even when you look at when in the games that they played together, when Isaiah Davis was getting a little bit more run, he was the more efficient back than anyone else there. Now I say that because anytime a new coaching staff enters the picture, I'm going to be more inclined to think that they're okay with blowing up whatever is existing there because they have no ties to that backfield, which is why I think we've seen at least the rumors of Brees Hall being dealt and them not necessarily being like totally all in. And them, they've been open about also having a committee backfield and a split backfield and such. So to me, I liked Isaiah Davis as like a really solid day 3 prospect last year. He was someone that I thought, it was a really weak running back class. So he was someone that like stood out to me as like, this is one of my favorite day 3 sleepers. And then obviously, he gets drafted with Braylon Allen and things just kind of went to the crapper as a result of that. But I do think Davis is talented. And so given that this is a new coaching staff and they could shake up the backfield, going back to what I talked about earlier with how coaching staffs and coaching decisions are really what's driving a lot of the volume at running back. And it's not always just a talent driven thing. I think that if it if they see it as a talent driven thing, I think Isaiah Davis might even be better than Braylon Allen. Like, I don't think that it's a locked in thing that Braylon Allen is a better player than Davis. So see if he can work his way up the depth chart a little bit, see if he can work into some work himself. He could easily just not be involved whatsoever, but you're not paying anything at all to get Isaiah Davis. So I think he's an interesting player to call out.
How do you expect this backfield? I know you talk a lot about ambiguous backfields and the players to target in those ambiguous backfields. Obviously, Brees Hall is the guy still going in rounds 3 and 4. People are betting on him because of the past production. But do you think that maybe we're a little too high on Brees Hall and probably a little bit too low on these other guys? Or do you think this, we've got 3 good running backs, we want to use all of them? Do you think that's just kind of off-season coach speak that we can ignore?
Yeah, I think that the way a guy like Brees' price is probably about right. And I say that just because the upside is clearly there and we've seen it and we know that he can be one of those game-breaking running backs. And so like I'm okay with sort of buying into that. The one thing I'll say though is that this backfield is going to become a lot more dynamic on the ground, but a lot less dynamic through the air with Justin Fields quarterbacking them. That's a fear I always have with running backs with mobile quarterbacks is you get a decent floor, but the ceiling is a little bit capped with these kinds of players. Even like
only a 4-headed committee once you factor in Justin Fields. Yeah.
And you look at Fields' backfields historically, and then you look at even like, look at like Lamar Jackson historically, his backfields, like the Ravens score so many touchdowns and they're so effective on offense. And even still, like Gus Edwards is scoring all these touchdowns and he's viable in fantasy when he had that crazy touchdown season, but he still wasn't anything like overly special. It wasn't until we get Derrick Henry, who's obviously a unicorn, where we finally get that really special season at running back. There's just a lot of correlation between, mobile quarterbacks being not as good as people think for their running backs, because they do like running backs are more efficient with mobile quarterbacks. So the yards per carry rates are probably going to increase, but people think that that's more important than like overall volume and overall targets in an offense, when I care about fantasy football and we want volume, right? Like they could be really, really efficient, but that's not going to win us fantasy championships all the time. So I think Brees is probably properly priced, just given, like, I think he's probably like realistically a mid-range, like from a projection standpoint, like a mid-range RB2 with upside, just because it's Brees Hall. But I wouldn't be like paying strong RB1 prices like we were a year ago.
And I don't want to get completely off the rails here, but something I dug up recently is that Justin Fields, when you look early in his career, he checked down at a lower rate than any other quarterback. And then last year we saw this drastic change where he was top 3 in check down rate. So I don't know if that was something where Tomlin and Arthur Smith were able to coach him up, or if he just had a little bit more trust in Najee and Jalen Warren. But if that can bleed over into his playing in New York, where he's willing to check down a little bit, then we've got multiple paths for all of these running backs to outperform their ADP.
Yeah. The one thing I will say, though, is that if you look at the split of Fields and Russ last year in Pittsburgh, the Steelers team backfield, and like you can look at Najee Harris. Najee Harris only got relevant in fantasy football after they made the switch at quarterback. So like I have some fear about what that means, but I also don't really, I'm not a believer that Justin Fields is going to definitely be the long-term answer for New York either.
Well, guys, we did 9. We got 9 breakout players into this episode. And, dynasty managers, go out there, make some trades, do your thing, have fun. It's May. Just go have fun. All right. And fantasy people, we're going to be back for you guys in June. That's when we're going to start doing all of our fantasy shows. Right now, we're going to finish out May as our dynasty month because Dave and I are going to be doing our dynasty rankings, and then we'll make that switch over. But we're going to be doing these episodes every Tuesday for you. So make sure you're downloading on the podcast side, leave us a review. It's a huge help for us. And then over on YouTube, you can catch our, beautiful shining faces over there every single Tuesday this off season. And then as the off season goes, we're going to switch to 2 episodes a week and 3, 4, 5 as the off season goes on. But JJ, I want to thank you for joining us, man. And tell everybody everything that you got going on right now over at Late Round.
Yeah, man. I got the Late Round podcast. It's always out. A couple episodes a week. There are more coming soon too. And then there's a Late Round prospect guide where I profiled all the running backs and wide receivers that were at the combine. I got updated scores in there for post draft stuff because I input draft capital into it. Have write ups for all those guys, and then the year 2 stuff that we talked about today. That's all in there as well. It's 165 pages of pure nerdiness. So if you're into that kind of thing, check it out over on lateround.com.
I want to say, of course, we plugged our prospect guide at the beginning of the show too, but download JJ's as well. Like, I don't think that you should just be looking at one as just like, this is what I'm drafting off of. I think that as a fantasy football player and enthusiast who's tuning into the show, you want as many opinions as possible. So check out JJ's too. He's going to agree with us on some things, disagree with us on other, but that's what makes this whole thing fun, is kind of gathering all the information and making those decisions yourself.
Like I said, it's May. Go blow your money on silly things for your dynasty rookie drafts. It's going to make the summer that much better. Kids are going to be out of school soon, guys. Okay. Just, go have some fun right now. Well, as always, I want to thank everybody for watching and listening all the way through. I want to thank our special guest, JJ Zachariason, for joining us, for myself, for Dave, for JJ. We'll see you guys next time. Adios.